Fantastic. Thank you ever so much. So we're about to begin the hot yoga class. So if you can move your chairs and get your mats out, and we're going to start our stretching in 5 minutes, okay? My name is Sarah Jane Williams. I lead Smart Mobility in Ford of Europe, and this is my first trip to Israel. I arrived on Monday, and I have already been blown away by the people that I've met, the fantastic food, and also the wine. And just to demonstrate that, I come from London. Oh, can you put the slides up for me?
Consular?
Is it possible to have the slides?
Okay, we have it.
Yeah. So from normal English breakfast to an Israeli breakfast is like coming to heaven, I have to say. As well as enjoying the great people, the good food and the wine, I've also had the privilege of meeting a number of the automotive and mobility startups here in the region. And it's been both refreshing and inspiring to see the thinking and the talent that's been developed. But one of my reflections is that really the Israel technology industry has an awful lot to thank the military for. And you know, it's not unique to Israel where the military has been involved in a lot of innovation. If you look back to the kind of 1960s, 70s, the US was the Defense Advanced Project Agency that actually set the vision and the technology for what we now know as the World Wide Web. When they started to think about it, it was really about creating networked computers. What they actually over that time kind of really birthed was a complete global and social revolution where how we communicate, how we relate, even how our brains actually develop and function has changed because of the internet. If you look around the world today, over half of the world's population, that's over 4 billion people, currently use the internet. So one kind of military-inspired technology innovation that's certainly impacted all of our lives hugely. The second one, which is really pertinent for today, is DARPA, the defense agency. They were also instrumental in creating the impetus for what we now talk about as self-driving cars. Similar to the kind of the vision that was set out around connecting computers or creating network computers, the vision that the Defense Agency had, it wasn't to kind of create a totally different autonomous future for us. It was simply about putting vehicles onto the battlefield that would be able to drive themselves. So they set up a series of competitions. The first competition was across the desert. No competitor managed to get their vehicle to cover it. But the one that's most well known, which was back in 2007, was the Urban Challenge. And this is when you begin to see for the first time vehicles which had to navigate through an urban environment, had to manage obstacles. And the winning vehicle actually had on that vehicle at the time digital mapping, GPS localization, radar, cameras, and even the spinning rooftop laser to help it navigate. And this was back in 2007. And what they kind of demonstrated during that competition was really the future possibility that we could have a connected, autonomous, and shared future in transportation. If I come back to my own company, so I work for Ford. Henry Ford believed that freedom of movement would drive human progress and had very much this vision that by opening out the highways for mankind, it would actually enable people to access jobs, access healthcare, drive communities, and actually be able to better themselves, kind of almost like the social mobility that would come based on the fact that people had freedom of movement. In the last 100 years, we've pretty much provided that freedom of movement through a physical vehicle, in the shape of a car, and vans and trucks in some cases. But it's no longer possible to have freedom of movement through a vehicle if you look at urban environments and look at cities. More and more of us are moving into cities, and with that comes growing congestion and air quality. when I came from the airport on Monday, my taxi driver was telling me a little bit of his life story, which was incredibly heartwarming. And one of the observations that he made was in his lifetime, the population here in Tel Aviv has pretty much doubled. So, going to just under 500,000, with pretty much over half of those residents actually owning vehicles in the city. Having seen some of the traffic jams and experienced some of the roads, we know as more and more people keep moving into cities, the vision of people having a kind of a personally owned vehicle is not going to achieve freedom of movement in cities. So what we've got is really a kind of a design gap. So originally, we thought about having vehicles to help people move around. But because of what we have in cities now, that's no longer feasible. And what we are doing now is thinking about how to reshape the future of mobility, particularly in cities. As part of our kind of changing focus over the last few years, we've established a full kind of smart mobility capability within Ford. And with that, our focus is to work with cities to help them, or to help us understand and to address the key challenges that cities face. We are learning, we're working with cities, we're partnering to understand what that future might look like. And that covers all different layers of the transportation operating system. So it's looking at the vehicles, obviously, but also looking at the infrastructure, looking at the connectivity, and looking at other and alternative ways to move both people and goods around cities. And we very much believe that self-driving vehicles will be one of the solutions, just one of the solutions that will help cities address transportation in the future. And with that, we expect autonomous vehicles to be kind of fully embedded in the moving of people and goods. We see us operating really self-driving vehicles in a very different business model to how we've sold vehicles previously. So it's no longer about kind of driving and ownership. It's about access and being driven. And the way that we see it is pretty much as a on-demand service where you will hail either a service for moving people or for moving goods within a city environment. And that's the future that we are kind of looking towards and building as we think about what our autonomous vehicles will be. Ultimately, what we want to do is help build better cities where people can still have that freedom of movement and be able to move around and actually help make people's lives better as part of that. In the same way that the internet has completely transformed how we all live, work, and play, we also expect shared and autonomous transportation to make a big difference. So in today's discussion with our illustrious panel that I will introduce shortly, we're going to focus on, not on the technology, but on the impact of having autonomous vehicles operating both in cities for citizens and also for the various different transportation operating companies that want to work within this area. So with that, I'm going to come and join the panel, and if you can switch to the introduction slide with the panelists, that'd be fantastic.
השקופית. Consular, please. Thank you. The panel slides. Meirav, okay, we have it.
Okay, so which slide should we start with? So we have Eyal Meyer, who's from Mercedes. We have Rami Bahalul, practice that one, from NVIDIA. We have Avanti Sane from VMware, and we have Yovav Meidad from MoveIt. I'm going to ask, just to start the discussion, them firstly just to introduce themselves properly, so they can tell you a bit about what they do, but also to talk about what role they see their company playing in the overall kind of autonomous transportation operating system. I will start ladies first. So Avanti, can I ask you just to introduce yourself and talk a bit about VMware's role in the autonomous mobility system?
Of course. Hi everyone, my name is Avanti Sane and I'm part of the product marketing team at VMware IoT. So how many of you know what VMware does? Show of hands. I know 2 employees now. Oh, okay. So I guess we need a little primer here. So VMware is basically the virtualization company. So pretty much all of your organizations use the data center in some way, and we have created a virtualization technology which allows you to optimize how you use your IT infrastructure by helping you optimize your compute, storage, and network needs. So if you think about it, because of us, your IT infrastructure can be used much better and lowers your cost of ownership, right? So when you think about IoT or even autonomous cars, which is basically a data center, because an autonomous car today can produce as much data as you would require for 14 servers. So for us, it's basically new kinds of IT infrastructure, which means all the good technology that we use in the data center, now we are optimizing it for the edge and bringing it to the Internet of Things. And one example of that is autonomous cars. So that's kind of where we play. And in terms of the solution that we provide, it's basically we are trying to virtualize the edge systems or gateways that run in an autonomous car. So how many people know what a gateway or an edge system is? All right, another primer coming up. So you have all these sensors and actuators which actually make the car smart, if you will. So edge systems and gateways are these little hubs, or think of them as cable boxes in your house, which these sensors connect to, and then which go on and connect to the cloud. So what we are doing is we are providing virtualization on top of those edge systems and gateways, which allows us to do a couple of things. Number one, it abstracts the software from the hardware. And that's important because for cars, they have different components. So it allows you to create some sense of interoperability. The other advantage is security, because all these components are so different. Each component can live in its own little box. So if one gets compromised, the others don't get affected. Finally, it basically, whenever you optimize or virtualize something, you can use the compute power better. So it kind of primes it for more complex future uses for an autonomous car. So I'll take a breath here. I'm in marketing, as you can tell. But that's me.
Thank you. And then can I move to my far left? Eyal, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Eyal Meir. I'm head of innovation here at the new Mercedes-Benz Research and Development Center in Tel Aviv. So I think everyone knows we are one of the world's biggest premium car manufacturers. What some people don't know is that we're also the biggest producer of commercial vehicles, trucks, vans, buses. We also do business in leasing, in fleet management, as well as mobility services. So we have a large portfolio of transportation-related services, and as such, I think we will be very active in this field, from manufacturing to providing intuitive mobility services across the board.
Thank you very much. And next, can we move over to Yovav?
So hi, my name is Yovav. I'm running marketing and growth at Moveit. Moveit's mission is very simple. We want to simplify urban mobility all around the world. And we do it using two main products. Products for consumers. Anyone here has Moveit on his phone? Not enough hands, so launch the App Store, download Moveit, and this way you'll be able to know how to get from one point to another in the most convenient way using any form of mobility that is not your own car. So that includes public transportation, car sharing, ride sharing, bicycle, and more. And in the last 6 years, we've grown to have more than 200 million users that use our product in 2,500 cities around the world. And for the cities and the municipalities, we offer a set of products that helps them operate and plan better mobility services for their citizens. And as cities get congested, they would like to start encouraging people to stop using private cars. They realize that they have to offer what's called mobility as a service, MaaS. And our platform is equipped to help them get there.
Great, thank you. And then last but not least, Rami.
Thank you. So I'll follow the other question that was previously. How many people know what NVIDIA does other than gaming? Okay, good. So NVIDIA developed an end-to-end solution for automotive, to develop automotive platform or automotive vehicle. We're starting from developing the data center or the training that requires to actually develop the autonomous vehicle. That requires to gather a lot of data, petaflops of data that requires to train the model, and that is done on our data center platform. Then we develop at the other end the actual vehicle platform that deploy the model and use NVIDIA platform to actually run the vehicle, be able to capture all the different sensors, what we call inferencing model, and be able to run the car autonomously. OEM in parallel are actually trying to simulate billions of miles before they actually go on the road in order to save money, save casualty. And NVIDIA also developed, in addition to the Drive platform, the Drive Constellation, which is a complete simulation platform that we hand to OEM to simulate the complete model before it's actually deployed in the car.
Great, thank you. And as you can tell by the introductions, we have 4 very different types of companies represented here. But what's really interesting is that to deliver an autonomous future, partnerships really is going to be key to that. And it's different types of companies, from a 400-person startup, 130-person startup, through to some of the kind of larger traditional established OEMs, as well as the kind of much deeper tech companies that are having to work together. So I'm going to move on to our first question around some of the changes that we see. One of the key societal changes is a move from kind of what we talked about as ownership to access, so owning a vehicle to having access to mobility, which Yovav also talked about. So first question, that's got 2 parts, so you do need to listen here, is do you believe this shift has really started in the mobility industry, and will it continue until we see the end of private ownership? I'm going to start that one with Eyal.
Sure. So we definitely believe in this transition, and the transition essentially started once people started consuming mobility as a service. The transition will probably take a very long time, though. So if you look at various estimates by experts, we're talking about between 10 to 15 to 30 to 40 years until it's completed. What we're expecting to see in the meantime is a hybrid model where people still have car ownership, but it's augmented by access to mobility services. And we'll see the ratio of that changes over time. With respect to the shift and the inflection point, one data point that you can look at, a lot of analysts look for a peak car, so the point in which right now, car ownership percentages has been increasing steadily over the past 50 plus years. And everyone's expecting it at some point to decline. So all the analysts keep looking for it. So I think the peak is still ahead of us. Last year, if you look at the data for the US, I think American bought something like 17.6 million companies, which was one of the top 5 years on record in terms of buying a new car. Cities like San Francisco, where everyone's very green and environmental, still see a higher pace of people buying automotive than population growth. So I think it's still ahead of us, but at some point it will come. So we were definitely anticipating that. At Daimler, what we're doing as part of it, we have our core businesses where we manufacture vehicles, but we're also providing mobility services. In March of this year, we announced a joint venture with BMW to combine our mobility services. So we have, for people who don't know, MyTaxi, which is the largest e-hailing taxi hailing app in Europe. We have Movo that provides multimodal transportation. So we are positioning ourselves to provide more and more mobility services to our customers in addition to selling vehicles.
Great, thank you. And Yovav, can I ask you the same question?
Sure. So this phenomenon, as I said, is part of our vision. We understand that every city is actually in a different phase when it comes to allowing people additional mobility services. The more modern and more cities that realize consumers' need, for example, Madrid, allow many different forms of mobility to be deployed around the streets. and then they're looking for a way to manage it. Because one of the phenomena that we see the last 2-3 years, is that as private companies start to deploy these alternative modes of transit, whether it's shared bikes, OFO, Mobike, Bird with their scooters, and Uber a few years ago, these private companies deploy massive amounts of vehicles to city, and the city in a way loses control over what's happening. Instead of congestion being reduced, congestion is actually increasing. And our position is that the city really needs a platform in order to regain control over what's happening, better understand the demand by the consumers, and having an app that actually knows where people are going from one place to another is critical to understand the demand needs of the consumers, and at the same time providing the city the tools to better deploy, manage, and optimize the supply side. I think this is going to be key, because if cities will continue to allow private companies to raise billions of dollars, buy vehicles, buy bikes, and deploy them into the city, it's just going to become catastrophe. But long term, definitely consumers are going to shift to consume mobility as a service, there's no doubt about it.
So just one follow-up question to both of you. Do you see yourself in your lifetime not privately owning a vehicle?
Yeah, of course. Definitely. Well, I live in the suburbs, so I'll probably continue to buy cars, but if people that live in the city choose to live in a metropolitan area, most likely within 5 years, if they live in a modern European city, for example, there's no need to buy a car.
You only need to drive this car once in order to be convinced that you want to drive it.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to add to that. I'd like to add to the same point. I think from a consumer... Hello? Okay. From a consumer point of view, I think the shift will happen when the total cost of access becomes lower than the total cost of ownership. So for example, why would I spend $20,000 on a car if I'm using it only 5% of the time? And then like you rightly said, there will be some special circumstances where you want to own. So what if your wife is pregnant, or you have an illness, an ill member in your family, or like you said, you just live in a remote place where you do not have access to those services. But yes, the shift will happen, and I think the cost will be an important factor.
If I can add to this, in US alone, there is about 60 million hearing and vision impairs. So these guys cannot drive today. So when you talk about smart shared mobility or autonomous vehicle, these guys will benefit from this, and obviously they will use it.
I'm someone who likes mountain biking, and I often head up into the mountains in different parts of the UK. And I have to say, I don't see in my lifetime being able to take an autonomous vehicle to go and explore some of the areas that I've been to. But I do look forward to the day. Okay. Moving on then to think about, I guess, the customer adoption of this. So as someone who has tried Uber pools and tried different forms of shared transportation, I realize it's often not as convenient and as nice as you would like it to be. So question initially to VMware, so to Avanti. How do you think we should make shared transportation an attractive alternative to private use of vehicles?
So, like I said, the cost would be one big factor. Another thing that I see affecting this is government regulation. If you make ownership of cars just more expensive, or start levying taxes on pollution or parking or things like that, then I think that will drive adoption a little more.
And can I ask the same question to Yovav?
I think you touched on both points. Price, definitely. And if a city offers, one of the things that we work, for example, in Madrid, is to offer one app that combines all mobility services with one payment option that works across all the different forms of mobility. Because some of the issues that we see in other places requires the consumer to download multiple applications, register multiple accounts, set up multiple payment information. It's very inconvenient, this fragmentation of apps for consumers. Aggregating everything into one product that has all the information you need for all mobility services with one payment gives you a lot of convenience, and that convenience drives adoption.
So ultimately it's cost and convenience, you think, are the key drivers?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Just one point. At Daimler, we also have Movil, which does exactly that. It's available mostly in Germany, but you can, in one purchase, you can get a taxi, train ride, and all modes of transportation. So that's definitely where the future is going.
This is the wonderful world of competitors on stage. Okay. Thinking about the introduction of autonomous vehicles, what do you think are the most likely kind of use cases or user stories that we will address either for moving people or goods in the near term with autonomous vehicles? And Eyal, I'd like to start with yourself on that one.
Sure. So consumer behavior and speed of adoption are obviously very difficult to predict. I think one natural place is autonomous shared mobility, so what people call robotaxi. So this would be the most straightforward use case. Another thing is long haul freight for trucks, where we really see the pain today, and where the price impact is probably going to be the biggest. I think like most consumer revolutions, they're really going to depend on the convenience that we provide, and this was a point that we raised here before. So when you use autonomous vehicle, you actually get some time back. So the question is, what will you do in that time? Will you be able to sleep better because you have a bed in your car? Will you be able to consume entertainment and watch your Netflix? Can you work? So depending on the designs of certain cars, we expect to see it impacting certain industries like regional airlines, where it wouldn't make sense for you to take a plane anymore from, I don't know, New York to Boston or LA to San Francisco. It would just be much easier, much more convenient to do it in a car, sleep, work, and do whatever you want instead of going through the hassle of airport security.
Okay. And Rami, can I ask you the same question?
Yes, thank you. So I think in terms of use case, the AV will influence many different use cases. The first one I see is robotaxi, so shared mobility. Mainly because analysts actually said that the price per mile will be about 17 cents. And we talked about cost here. So definitely cost will drive the people adopting shared mobility, robotaxi. And the next will go is everywhere in the commercial market that requires increase of productivity. So we see end-to-end, for example, in US, there are thousands of trucks actually going coast to coast. And when you see this and you multiply this by labor, you can calculate this to many millions of dollars. So here, if you actually can transition this from an actual trucks to a robotaxi or to AV, you actually improve cost significantly.
You mentioned, or both of you touched on robotaxis. When a well-known ride-hailing company first brought their vehicles into London, they actually increased the number of vehicles on the street by 40,000, and I think as Yovav is also aware. How do we think that we can implement autonomous vehicles in a way that doesn't cannibalize public transportation and doesn't actually create more congestion on the streets? Yovav, do you want to address that one first?
Yeah, I think one of the first key things to be aware of is that a lot of these decisions requires data. Data related to the supply side, what forms of mobility are available, and this needs to be very accurate information. So it includes the real-time availability of every moving object, and also what's the demand patterns of the consumers. If you don't have good and accurate supply and demand data, you cannot make smart decisions as a planner and as an operator how many vehicles to allow in a city like London, for example. And this is at least part of our platform, is to provide these urban mobility analytics tools that really help decision makers form smart decisions when it comes to meeting supply and demand and balancing it all the time.
And can I ask you the same question, Eyal?
Sure, I agree. It's all about the data, right? So the estimates about the data that autonomous vehicles will generate range from 1 gigabyte per second of autonomous driving to 100. So we're talking about enormous amounts of data. And I think data will facilitate what we call multimodal transportation. It will allow you to know, wait a minute, area is going to be congested. I shouldn't be taking an autonomous vehicle today. And the app's going to offer me straight ahead to take public transportation or a bicycle or something like that. Another place where the insights from the data will be very useful is for the regulator. So today you see places like London, you mentioned, that have a congested pricing zone. It's a fixed price. It doesn't take into account anything. If you have real data from the vehicles, you know how many people ride the autonomous vehicle, so you can replace carpooling lanes. You know what the demand is, what the supply is. So you actually have a lot of data that you can actually start charging people for road usage. So one of the predictions that we'll see a transition from parking fees to road usage fees for that. And this is also to avoid the fear that autonomous vehicles will just drive around and not park anyway to avoid parking fees. So if you actually charge them by usage fee, a dynamic charge based on number of passengers, based on pollution, time of day, etc., the regulator can actually control this in the best way, similar to what you see on Uber today, surge pricing, but much more advanced and regulated.
But what is it that you think will stop somebody from kind of taking public transport, which clearly is there to create accessible mobility within cities, to then taking an autonomous vehicle wherever they go, and then actually meaning that public transportation no longer becomes viable?
So I think transportation will not go away. So I think in many cases, for me, when I go to the airport, I prefer to take a train because I know it's going to get there on time. I'm not subject to traffic congestion.
You wouldn't say that if you lived in London, but...
So I think in many cases, I think we really have to think it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. If you have luggage, if you don't have luggage, if it's easy for you to walk. But I think the future is going to be multimodal transportation. The app's going to tell you these are the options. For this you need to be a little bit you need to be fit because it means walking upstairs. For this it'll be less convenient but faster. So it'll just give you all the options, and then you can make an informed decision. But again, data is key.
So I guess both between Move It and Moveable, we'll be managing how people move around cities going forwards.
And if I can add, so there will be public transportation will not go away, as Eyal mentioned, but I think safety is one of the key things that will help people, give them the feeling that they actually can start using AV. And for that, there are regulations that are regulating the AV development. And traffic and public transportation will become autonomous as well. So public transportation, that we take a train, and I'm taking a train to work every day, it will become completely autonomous. And that is a phase that we'll see in the public transportation as well. So safety, I think, is key.
Can I just stick with you to ask the next question? One of the things that has been questioned is really the role of humans when we have autonomous vehicles. What do you see as the role of humans in complementing a user experience in the mobility world?
Great question, thank you. So a lot of people talk about AV and the development of AV, but I think the person that will be in the AV car is actually in the HMI, the human-to-machine interface, is not less important than the actual development of the AV car itself. So for example, NVIDIA developed a platform called Drive IX, which is communicating with the driver. So if it's a natural language processing, if it's reading eye gaze or face movement, all of this will, in my view, will help the passenger to feel more comfortable to be in the car and to adjust into driving a car and to communicate with the car. So communicating with the car and be able to feel that whatever the car is doing, it's predictable from our perspective. You can communicate with the car and do whatever you like, and not just sit there and do nothing. So, key thing.
One of the tests that we did in Ford was to do kind of trial pizza deliveries with vehicles which were simulated to be autonomous, to see how humans interact with it. And one of the funny observations was that the person that was collecting their pizza from the vehicle some of them wanted to say thank you to the car, some of them said goodbye to the car, and actually was kind of treating the vehicle almost as a person. I'm going to ask Avanti the same question.
Yeah, so one thing I definitely see is for these AVs to be smarter and more personalized, you will always require human input. That's with any kind of machine learning or AI, where continuously you need some human insight or something to tweak it better. So that's going to be an ongoing process for sure. And another thing which will be important from a human perspective is scheduling. So, for example, Google Maps already does that, right? When it's 5 o'clock, it tells me, oh, this is the time you usually leave for home, so the traffic is less or whatever. But that doesn't mean I leave every day at the same time. So I think scheduling is still something which will require human input.
Great, thank you. One of the things that is being talked about a lot at the moment is unintended consequences. So, when we make technology change or when we make societal change, we talk about almost the kind of the unknown things as unintended consequences. I'd like to kind of ask each of the panelists just to have a think about what you think the kind of potential unintended consequences of autonomous transportation is likely to be. Who would like to go first?
Okay, I'll take it. We talked earlier about it, and
you can't use my example, okay?
And one of the things that can be a consequences is that people will become less nervous. Obviously, more productive. This is, I think, giving, right? But will be less nervous. They will actually get into the car like they go into a theater. The car will become another form of entertainment. And think about it. So you drive to work. You have an hour drive. You're becoming more productive, but you're actually using entertainment a lot, and you're much more relaxed. What will happen to the world with people more relaxed? I'll let for other people to predict. But this is definitely one of the things.
So we will be more laid back when we have autonomous vehicles. Actually, Avanti,
based on that, maybe
next.
people will be able to work more. They'll spend more time on the office because they'll have a mobile office in a way. But if you think about it, today public transportation is kind of autonomous. When you board a bus, right, your life kind of is dependent in a driver's hands that you don't know the driver and you're counting on him and you feel completely safe about it. Same goes for the train. It's just crossing this psychological barrier of walking into a vehicle that doesn't have any other passengers and drives by itself. So I think the psychological shift, at least for the younger generation, is going to be very quick to pass. And then the adoption will be massive.
So we have being more laid back, working more.
I think personally it would improve the quality of my life because I joke my second job is just doing pick up and drop off for my 2 kids. So I'd be happy not to do that. So I'm looking forward to this revolution for sure.
Great.
From my perspective, there are 2 changes. One is really, as I mentioned before, what will we do with the extra time we have and how will we spend it? And this could have unintended consequences like impacting your family time. A lot of families today spend a lot of time in vehicles. Will they spend less time together? I don't know, it's a question. It really depends on what they can do in the car together. So one could be more or less family time, depending on how the car is designed. Another impact, a big impact that we see is impact on other businesses. So today there are a lot of businesses and a lot of industries that are built around the transportation. So one example I have is McDonald's. So 70% of sales in McDonald's in the US come from drive-thrus. That will change. Motels in the US, they're all built around highways. No need for that anymore if you have autonomous vehicles. So there's many of industries who are going to have to go through major transformation because of this. Industries that have nothing to do with vehicles and transportation, like McDonald's.
And the conversation we had before was another unintended consequence actually relates to health. One of the I can't call it a benefit, but in our current world where we have a high number of car accidents, particularly involving very fit younger men, they become a very good source of organ donation. So one of the concerns a lot of the senior medical people are raising is actually that we will have a significant shortage going forward as the number of accidents declines, that we will not be able to do organ donation to actually help people recover who've got other challenges. So kind of a slightly different perspective, but another unintended consequence. So I have the clock ticking down in front of me, and we've got 1 minute left. So just to wrap up, thank you. I guess firstly just to say a huge thank you to all of the guests, so to Yovav, Avanti, to Rami, and to Eyal. So thank you very much for joining the panel.
You're welcome.
And I kind of just leave you with a thought around, kind of how autonomous and shared transportation will change your world, because I think we all see it very much as a matter of when, not if. Have a good day.